cloudy with a chance of meatballs. We were all sitting around the big kitchen table. It was Saturday morning, pancake morning. Mom was squeezing oranges for orange juice. Henry and I were betting on how many pancakes we each could eat, and Grandpa was doing the flipping. Seconds later, something flew through the air, headed towards the kitchen ceiling, and it landed right on Henry. After we realized that the flying object was only a pancake, we all laughed, even Grandpa. Breakfast continued quite uneventfully. All the other pancakes landed in the pan. All of them were eaten, even the one that landed on Henry. That night touched off by the pancake incident at breakfast, and Grandpa told us the best tall-tale bedtime story ever. Across the oceans, over lots of bumpy mountains, across 3 hot deserts and 1 small ocean, there lay the tiny town of Chew and Swallow. In most ways, it was very much like any other tiny town. It had a main street lined with stores, houses and trees, and gardens around them, a schoolhouse, about 300 people, and some assorted cats and dogs. But there were no stores for food in the town of Chew and Swallow. They didn't need any. The sky supplied it all the food they could possibly want. The only thing that was really different about Chew and Swallow was its weather. It came 3 times a day, at breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Everything that everyone ate came from the sky. Whatever the weather served, that was what they ate. But it never rained, it never did snow, and it never blew just wind. It rained things like soup and juice, and snowed mashed potatoes and green peas, and sometimes the wind blew in storms of hamburgers. The people would watch the weather report on television in the morning, and they would hear a prediction for the next day's food. When the townspeople went outside, they carried their plates and cups and glasses and forks and knives and napkins with them, and that way they would be always prepared for any kind of weather. If there were anything left over, they usually just took containers with them and put them in their refrigerator. The menu varied, and by the time they woke up in the morning, breakfast was coming down. After a brief shower of orange juice, low clouds of sunny-side-up eggs moved in, followed by pieces of toast. Butter and jelly sprinkled down for the toast, and most of the time it rained milk afterwards. For lunch one day, frankfurters, already in their rolls, blew in from the northwest at about 5 miles an hour, and there were mustard clouds nearby. And the wind shifted to the east and brought in baked beans. A drizzle of soda finished off the meal. Dinner came one night, and it consisted of lamb chops, becoming heavy at times with occasional of ketchup. Periods of peas and baked potatoes were followed by a gradual clearing, with a wonderful jello setting in the west. The sanitation department of Chew and Swallow had a rather unusual job for sanitation departments. It had to remove all the food that fell in the houses, and the sidewalks and the lawns. The workers cleaned up after every meal and fed all the dogs and cats. Then they emptied some of it into their surrounding oceans for the fish and turtles and the whales to eat. The rest of the food was put back into the earth so the soil would be richer for the people's flower gardens. Life for the townspeople was delicious until the weather took a turn for the worst. Spaghetti ties up town! One day there was nothing but stinky gorgonzola cheese all day long. The next day there was only broccoli, all overcooked. And the next day there were Brussels sprouts and peanut butter with mayonnaise. And another day there was pea soup fog. No one could see where they were going, and they could barely find the rest of the meal that had gotten stuck in the fog. The food was getting larger and larger, and so were the portions. The people were getting frightened. Violent storms blew up frequently. Awful things were happening. On Tuesday, there was a hurricane of bread rolls, all day long and into the night. There were soft rolls and hard rolls, and some without seeds and some without. And there was white bread and rye bread and whole wheat toast. Most of it was larger than they had ever seen before. It was a terrible day. Everyone had to stay indoors. The roofs were damaged, and the sanitation department was beside itself. To help out, the people piled up the bread in their backyards and hoped that the birds would pick at it. And they did a little, but not that much. There was a storm of pancakes one morning and a downpour of maple syrup that nearly flooded the town. A huge pancake covered the school, and the kids couldn't even go. Lunch one day brought in 15-inch drifts of cream cheese and jelly sandwiches. Everyone ate themselves sick, and the day ended with a stomachache. There was an awful salt and pepper wind accompanied by an even worse tomato tornado. People were sneezing themselves silly and running to avoid the tomatoes. The town was a mess. There were seeds and pulp everywhere. The sanitation department gave up. It was too much. Everyone feared for their lives. They couldn't go outside most of the time. Many of the houses had been badly damaged, and the stores were boarded up. So a decision was made to abandon the town of Chew and Swallow. It was a matter of survival. The people glued together giant pieces of stale bread sandwiches and with peanut butter, and they took their absolute necessities with them and set sail on rafts for a new land. After being afloat for a week, they finally reached a small coastal town, which welcomed them. The bread had held up surprisingly well enough for them to build temporary houses for themselves. The children began school again, and the adults tried to find places for themselves in the new land. The biggest change was that they had to get used to buying food at the supermarket. They found it odd that food was kept on shelves and packaged in boxes and cans and bottles. Meat that had to be cooked was kept in large refrigerators. Nothing came down from the sky except rain and snow. The clouds above their heads were not made of fried eggs, and no one ever got hit by a hamburger again. And no one dared to go back to Chew and Swallow to find out what happened to it. They were too afraid. Henry and I were awake until the very end of Grandpa's story. I remembered his goodnight kiss. The next morning we awoke to snow falling outside by our window. We ran downstairs for breakfast and ate it a little faster than usual so we could go sledding with Grandpa. It was funny, but even as we were sliding down the hill, we thought we had saw a giant pat of butter at the top, and we could almost smell mashed potatoes. The end.